Welcome back to Paris Lesbos. One of us is a pixie, the other gets called Rena. If you caught last month's episode, you'll have heard of today's subject before. We're back in Russia pre-revolution for yet another Russian poet, Sophia Parnok. Rarely is her work translated into English, so you've probably not come across her before.
Although she does know some people who we might know.
As always, we start at the beginning in the Russian Empire's Black Sea region, where she was born on July 30th, 1885, depending what calendar you're using,
How does that work?
because the Russian calendar switched since then. Her family lived in the port city of Taganrog, which had declined in previous decades from being a bustling major port as importing and exporting shifted through other avenues. Due to having once been a major port, a large section of the population was Greek and Turkish, so it didn't really feel like a Russian city when Parnok was born. As to her parents, she was born to Alexandra Parnok, a young Jewish doctor, and her husband Yakov, a pharmacist and owner of an apothecary.
Wait, hold on. So her mother was a doctor in 1885?
Yes, very rare but plausible.
But really cool. Was that like more of a thing in Russia, or is that just due to her own excellence?
Sort of a combination of both. Now, this is where I am going to detour a little bit into how Russia was at the time, as Alexander III had become Tsar after the assassination of his reformist father, Alexander II. Now, despite Alexander II emancipating and giving full citizen rights to the serfs in the 1860s, in addition to changing military conscription to be universal rather than solely for the lower classes, and beginning to allow Jews to live outside of the zone called the Pale of Settlement if they had completed secondary school, someone killed this man with a bomb in his carriage because people felt he wasn't doing enough reforms fast enough.
Sounds like he did quite a lot, but I just from what we're hearing, it sounds like a lot of those reforms had been badly needed for some time.
This is true. One of my favorite Russian monarchs, Catherine II, is said to have at one point thought about emancipating the serfs, and then it was like the end of her reign where the French Revolution happened, and she was like, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do that just yet. Anyway, as a result, Alexander III cracked down in reaction to his father's death. In fact, the groundwork had been laid towards moving to a constitution for Russia right when Alexander II was assassinated, and this was abandoned under his son. It is stated that if Alexander II had lived just 48 hours more, that last reform would have gone through, but again, it didn't because he was assassinated for not doing reforms fast enough.
Wow, and then you see what happened to Russia kind of resulting from this. Quite a lot of dominoes hitting each other here. So, what does all this politics have to do with our poet?
It's primarily because her family was Jewish, and Taganrog was outside the Pale of Settlement. It also had never seen Jewish pogroms, though passers-by in a neighboring town did risk people stopping them to forcibly unbutton their pants to check for circumcision. Now, in Sophia's case, it probably helped that the family was not really religious. They fully spoke Russian and never attended synagogue. That said, her father did frequently express a wish to leave Russia for Western Europe.
You can be assimilated and still feel like maybe you're not welcome there.
Oh, definitely. Now, Sophia herself was the eldest of three children, and for 6 years was an only child before her brother and sister were born. Admittedly, that was a tragic twin birth as her mother died soon after it. Sophia considered it a second misfortune when her father married his children's German governess soon after his wife died, and that he had apparently been having an affair even before she died. Before you ask, no, we do not know the woman's name or anything about her actually. At roughly 9 years old, Sophia is sent to formal schooling for the next 8 years. Every listed subject except music was compulsory, so she learned religion, Russian, French, German, math, history, geography, physics, other sciences, drawing, needlework, gymnastics, choir singing, and dancing.
Now, when you say religion, this was Christianity. This was like a normal school and not a Jewish school, right?
Yeah, this was a normal Russian school, so I'm assuming the religion is entirely Russian Orthodoxy. School was also 6 days a week. Otherwise, you are free to picture similar hours and school calendar years from your own experiences, as that part is roughly the same. We do know she began writing poetry within the last 3 years of school. Not much survives. Her biographer Bergen notes one poem and a table of contents survive from 1900. Combined through mid May 1903, there are about 50 poems, mainly focused on sex and love, as she figured out she was a lesbian in a form of emotional therapy. Which is why I have always recommended that anyone in need pick up a pen or a paintbrush for free or low cost therapy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait, did you mean that she was like going to a therapist? But no, she was writing poetry and figuring it out herself.
Now, if you are about to ask me what she thought about lesbians and being one, there is nothing that I have found about that. It is only confirmed via her poetry that she got comfortable with her sexuality. This might have been encouraged by the idea at the time that schoolgirl crushes were something to grow out of for everyone, hence, no one batted an eye. To most observers at the time, it's noted her lack of interest in young men was the more concerning issue.
Oh, do we have instances of young men being thrust at her and her being like, nah, no thanks?
No, what we do have is confirmation that her first fling and probably first kiss was in 1901 during a Crimea vacation, but not much is known of it.
Got it. So nothing was happening for her with men, but things were happening with women.
When she graduated in May 1903, from what I can tell, Sophia won a gold medal, which is equivalent to the modern U.S. summa cum laude. She then disappears for 2 years after that when tracking her life.
What do you mean disappears? Like, what was she doing?
So, this is the thing with Sophia. Most of her life is not well documented outside of an affair with one other Russian poet. We do have speculation that she visited an uncle in St. Petersburg at this time, and that she may have also been living in Moscow, as decades later she reminisced on living in her late teens with another girl in Moscow under the patronage of the ballerina Catherine Gultzer. Yes, I have used the English version of some Russian names in this episode to limit any tripping over names for you all. So, Sophia may have been, for a time, dancing ballet professionally. However, she lacked financial independence and returned to her father sometime later. It appears that by 1905 she managed to convince her father to send her abroad with the reason of studying music in Geneva. In reality, she'd fallen in love with an actress. Either way, she settled in Geneva in early spring and might have very remotely, possibly, had relatives there. By this point, she was also befriending poets instead of dancers, but by the end of the year, she broke up with the actress.
Okay, so she's developing a little poetry community. What happens next?
Instead of returning to Russia, Sophia traveled to Florence and returned to Geneva in January 1906. However, I will note that despite having spent almost a year in Geneva, it was not until right before this trip that she finally enrolled in the Geneva Conservatory of Music. That didn't last long. Something, we don't know what, sent her leaving in the middle of the spring semester back to Russia. It is speculated general political conditions could have been involved due to the 1905 revolution that occurred at the end of 1905. One poet friend of Sophia's was expelled from university in the wake of that due to Tsar Nicholas II cracking down more on revolutionaries, and that included striking students. This went hand in hand with the rolling back of constitutional rights that had been granted the previous October.
Oh, that sounds bad.
This is a recurring theme of Russia, I feel, for the end of its monarchy, over the last 3 reigns. But anyway, by the beginning of May 1906, Sophia was back in Moscow and debating trying to get published in the symbolist journal Golden Fleece, but the symbolism put her off.
That wasn't her type of poetry.
No, it really wasn't. And then again, something came up, and by June, she was in her father's house again. It is said she reconsidered the journal idea before leaving Moscow, but she ended up rejected from there. Meanwhile, by the sounds of it, her father had no clue what to do with her and was frustrated at her life, resulting in a strict, reduced allowance. When she did finally get published, Sophia did so under a slightly altered version of her name as she dropped a letter from her last name. I will spare you all my attempts to pronounce it, but in print it looks like KH. One theory is that it was due to her father's condescension to her creativity. The biographer Bergen calls any attempt to attribute the spelling change solely to hiding her Jewishness to be an error. Her first poem would be published under this new spelling of her name in November 1906. Now, Sophia had been having an affair with Nadia Polakova, or at least one that had been going on for 5 years by the sounds of it, though I don't think they were always in the same country because that part is unclear.
Well, that lesbian long distance thing.
Yeah, we do know that, like many poets, her lover was her muse until the breakup in early 1907. We know Sophia was very bitter over it, especially as her ex would ignore her if they happened to cross each other in the street. By this point, she's 22 and figured she has done nothing in her life. She decided she had pride, but no particular ambition towards academic or intellectual pursuits. She wanted to be a poet, but lacked confidence in her own talents. Her own self criticism did not help, but she put that down to her good taste. On top of this, her father was threatening to cut her off if she did not get married and finally settle down. To that end, Sophia married a poet friend, Vladimir Wolkenstein. He might have loved her and certainly knew about her tastes. She respected him and did want a child.
That sounds like the best possible marriage that she could have, at least. It's a poet who respects her and she respects him.
On the surface, yes, and as a result, she married him in September 1907 in a Jewish ceremony. Unfortunately, it appears that after the marriage, Sophia discovered she could not have children. On the upside, she did get to settle in the capital and have an expanded social life. Her husband also encouraged her to pursue her education, which is how, in 1908, she attended the Bestuzhev Higher Courses for Women at St. Petersburg University to study history and philology.
Philology?
Yes. However, she switched to jurisprudence not out of an interest in law, but because she wanted a course that didn't make excessive demands on her.
So she wants to get educated, but not too much?
She wanted to be educated without walking around brain dead.
You know what? Fair. Same.
On the other hand, her marriage proved a confusing minefield. not because they disliked each other, but because Sophia did not love men, but could bed her husband and enjoy it, but not be satisfied by it. A fact that bewildered him and stroked his ego at the same time as the only man she bedded. Before anyone rages in the comments with theories, I'm just going to say humans are odd, and so are our brains, emotions, attractions, and libidos. Add to this situation her almost friends with benefits reaction to him finding out his doctor told him to abstain from sex for a time for his nerves. Sophia offered to move out of the house to not tempt him. She would later blame the stress of these complexities on the failure of her friendship with him and, by extension, their marriage. Her writing also dried up during the marriage. Sophia later believed this was due to her own lack of ambition and being married to a poet who had more ambition than she did. We have maybe 2 poems published during 1908, one of which is about wanting or having affairs with women while married. To add to this, she began to suffer digestive problems, which turns out to be frequent in cases of Graves' disease. This led to a summer in the countryside in a rented villa and a strict diet. At the time, she was working on translating Baudelaire, but the publisher backed out at this time, and a second publisher did not pay the agreed-upon advance for it, which messed up everything as she had borrowed money against the advance to pay her editor.
Oh boy. So she is not doing well at this time.
No, and then, very suddenly, after spending the holidays in Moscow as she did the year before, something occurred that made her not only not return to St. Petersburg, but also decide to ask for a divorce. Sophia's husband believed she either left him for a woman or for a return to lesbian life without him being dragged along behind her. She also was fully aware how divorce would invite social censure. Her health also routinely remained poor at this time. Neither dissuaded her, despite the lack of social life after her move to Moscow. However, by mid-March, she'd managed to recreate her social life, while her husband, from the beginning, did not want a divorce and was stalling. Theories include that he still loved her or just wanted to punish her for leaving him. He broke appointments to discuss the terms, and they argued endlessly about financial arrangements. In fact, part of this was that he told her siblings that she's a lesbian. The emotional blackmail did not work, and she did lecture him in a letter for it. I did not anticipate that you would draw the children into our private affairs and upset them for no reason. You won't spoil my relationship with them. All you'll do is make things unnecessarily unpleasant for them. In late spring, they finally divorced. She spent the next 2 years rushing from place to place, changing addresses in Moscow 5 times, and practically becoming nomadic till the 1917 revolution. It also brought some good news. By 1911, her poems were beginning to appear in prestigious journals, one of which was New Life. This still did not satisfy her, as she was not in a good position financially with her writing. We then have a blank until her father's death in 1913. It was apparently a rather out-of-body feeling at the funeral, as she described it like attending a public event and being out of place. By this point, it appears that she had become an editor for the literary section of Russian Talk under the male pseudonym of Andrei Polyanin, though she would sometimes miss deadlines due to illness. On the other hand, she had raised her price for poetry by line, and that had been accepted from 25 to 30 kopecks a line, which is roughly the thinking of 25 to 30 pennies if 100 kopecks makes 1 ruble. At least that's how I think of it. But Google was not helpful in figuring out conversions to modern USD, so do not quote me on that. Now, Sophia did have several lovers in the 4 years after her divorce, but their names are not written down in biographies. It's not until spring 1913 that we get Iraida Albrecht, the socialite daughter of a wealthy Moscow family. It sent Sophia back to working on her novella Anton Ivanovich. This was followed by a permanent staff position on Russian thought, but she took the second offer for the same position from Northern Annals, as she preferred the second publication.
Wow, but she's got choices now. This is looking up.
Yes, and with that thought, she took a trip in spring 1914 with Albrecht to tour Europe for 5 months, namely Italy, Germany, and England.
Oh, a trip to Europe in 1914. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, the bad news was that war began while they were in London, and that Sophia's brother had left Russia in July for Palestine after graduating from university, as he'd turned out to be an impassioned Zionist, unlike her, and he was in Jaffa when the war began. This prevented wiring him any funds. Now, there is an abrupt vanishing of Albrecht here in the text from Bergen, so I assume that means the relationship ended soon after the start of World War I. Instead, what we get next is the social circle that brings Sophia into contact with the poet Marina Tsvetaeva in mid-October 1914. They were introduced by a mutual friend at a house gathering, and Marina immediately liked her. Thus begins the 18-month affair that was the best-known period of Sophia's life.
Well, it sounds like this was a good relationship for her then.
Insert the meme of the dog sitting in the house on fire and going, "This is fine."
This is fine. Do I need to repeat that one?
No, I'm saying it's because, according to Bergen, Marina had a persona of considering herself like a child and states that she had either not been capable of an orgasm or hadn't experienced one. This is in the lead up to Bergen believing that this persona is why the relationship with Sophia did not work out. Hence the
Mm,
"this is fine" meme.
this is fine. So she's Sophie is well known, but the relationship is in some way flawed.
Yeah, it's almost, the description of it is like a mental block in Marina's head between persona and adult sexuality in the relationship, despite the fact she's 23, married, and the mother of a 2 year old. Anyway, Bergen also accuses Marina's biographers of defaulting to stereotypes about the relationship, specifically the depiction of a mannish, evil seducer and the passive, sex denying, innocent victim tropes that remind me more of old Hollywood films.
Yeah, Sophia hasn't given a mannish evil seducer to me at least.
Further, Bergen believes some of this is because of decadent tropes assigned to Sophia in Marina's poetry, though that was not the case in every poem of Marina's. Either way, the affair reached its peak in the year 1915. Now, to those who remember the previous episode where it seemed that Marina's husband got out of the way of this affair, that might be further true given we have descriptions of them flaunting their affair in literary society by going to parties together and not hiding at all. What followed in 2 months was Marina's friends and family giving up on stopping the affair, and Sophia already getting jealous over Marina's husband. By the time the breakup arrived in winter 1915 to 1916, it was a terrible one because neither wanted to be the first to let go, and they still had feelings for each other. Now, oddly enough, Sophia still hadn't published her first book by then. Instead, Poems came out in 1916 at the end of the breakup, or soon after it. The 5 sections were of different lengths and dealt with death, love, and poetry, as well as love and remembrance, apparently two separate themes here, Russia and war, and finally, wandering.
Wow, so it sounds very intense and like this tumultuous affair maybe got her creative juices flowing even if it ultimately had to end.
Yeah, and then Sophia met an actress, Ludmilla, sometime by January 1916, and thus ensued a rebound after Marina left, or possibly before she fully left, with her own new lover, and the two are also opposite in looks and personality.
We are not beating the allegations of messy.
Now, the February Revolution and the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II helped lift Sophia's mood while suffering a bout of illness from her Graves' disease. But this was short lived. The revolution forced the Northern Annals to close and left her without a day job after 5 years. Somehow, Sophia found work in an office somewhere to support herself. Also, due to the failure to end the war with Germany and the famine from winter's political upheavals, hunger gripped Moscow by August 1917. For health reasons, she and her current lover went to the Crimea and were there when the Russian Civil War began that November.
She keeps on having vacations in really bad times. But at least this time she's kind of out of the way, right?
Wrong. But first, as a result, the vacation gets extended for several years and involves writing a libretto that would not see light till 1930, in part due to a struggle to set it to music on the composer's part due to doubting his abilities. Now, at some point, even as her relationship with Ludmilla got rocky, they both ended up working in the local Ministry of Education. Things did not improve as summer brought drought and the special rations of civil servants, which existed in the absence of money, did not guarantee the ability to buy food at the store. The spring after that, and in the wake of the end of the Russian Civil War, so approximately 1923, from what I understand, Sophia was in a train accident and nearly died. She only survived because she switched seats to avoid facing backwards before the train started. Before the train started. No other details are known about this accident. Bergen believes it did solidify her thought of fate as an all-powerful, incomprehensible, and capricious thing. Also, Sophia had briefly been arrested with most Crimean intellectuals who did not actively support the Reds, but the dates of her arrest and imprisonment are unknown. What is known is that her health declined and she caught tuberculosis. Due to this and another drought, she ended up moving back to Moscow before winter, despite overcrowded trains in dirty and dangerous to unaccompanied women conditions.
Yeah, especially due to her previous experience with trains. Sounds really rough.
Yes, but she got out before starvation gripped the Crimea after she left, and theft of any food sources, including neighbors' chickens, was frequent. The next year, the crackdown on religion hit her work as the word God needed to be decapitalized in all written work. It was a very unfortunate time to be writing religion and poetry about the 1917 revolution. This was in addition to reviews on literary works now needing to pass a censor, which rejected two of her reviews. To add, her lover also had tuberculosis in her right lung and got way too thin from illness and deprivation. Actually, what follows just seems to be a constant wheel of someone in her circle falls ill, then recovers, and then soon after someone else falls ill with some disease, kidney ailments, Graves' disease, and so forth. During this time, Sophia did publish another book, Vines, in 1923, which is mainly about tracing her life through poetry up to her time in the Crimea during the Russian Civil War. This does not mean the battle with censorship was over even as she got a new job. The censorship continued with everyone trying to find ways around it. It does appear that by the mid 1920s, Sophia was self sufficient again, despite not having a permanent salary job. Illness still plagued her periodically, which inhibited this plan of finding a regular job. Now, as an aside, we're approaching the 1930s when Soviet economic and social policy changed. After 1927, the government and party fully controlled the arts and literature. There was literally a campaign in the papers against writers who did not conform to party norms. As a result, from 1928 until she died, Sophia was aware that her poetry would not be published as she would not conform.
Wow, so it's not even that she like has to write poetry good enough for people to buy it, it's that she if she wants to succeed in this poetry market has to write into the party line.
Censorship kills.
So what did she do next?
She appears to have been living with a female mathematician named Olga, who worked at the Moscow State University, though no one fully knows if this was a relationship or just friends. Somehow, though, she ended up helping to provide for the 5-year-old twins of Olga's brother after his death. This was in addition to her own ups and downs in fortune, so really, never not pressure for money, given the vibe from roughly 1917 onwards. She was, by 1930, living off of translating French poets and writers. That said, there was one good thing, but it came with compromise.
Oh,
Sophia's 1930 libretto was produced, but she had to agree to add a communist themed prologue and epilogue to the production for it to go through.
that's actually not that bad. You just kind of ignore the first and last parts if you want to see the libretto as itself.
It isn't the worst censorship I've seen, because I know there are cases in various regimes where it's like, rewrite the story to have this underlying bias or whatnot, and in this she just had to change the beginning and the end. But then we come to 1932 and Sophia's last love, a physicist named Nina, who was either divorced or widowed with a son in exile. However, she did not move out of Olga's place due to illness, so everything was cramped with no privacy. Meanwhile, Olga, already overworked, just suffered in silence and disapproval of Nina during this. Admittedly, even Sophia thought at one point before dying that the intensity of this affair hastened her towards the grave. We do come quickly to Sophia's death in August 1933 when Graves' disease affected her heart, causing a heart attack after being bedridden for 6 months in a different city from Moscow. They had to get a very slow horse and cart to take her back by road to Moscow. And at this point, epidemics were raging in the city, which led to fear the police would stop them and not accept the official paperwork that Sophia died of heart failure. But either way, they were not stopped. Her funeral was mainly attended by women, several being other poets, and then her grave at the time had only a wooden cross and wreath.
She was Jewish.
Someone decided to put a cross there. I hate to break it to you, if you look at the modern photographs of her gravesite, there is a stone cross.
Uh, Also, weren't they communist at the time? What are they doing with crosses?
Just because the government says one thing doesn't mean people are going to do it.
Fair point. That notwithstanding, presumably she has a legacy beyond the appearance of her grave.
A very small legacy. Her works remained obscure and unavailable after her death. Sophia herself believed that the hurdle with the censor would, in the end, be her lesbianism, but this is unconfirmed. Admittedly, according to her biographer Bergen, Sophia is the only open lesbian voice in Russian poetry. I cannot confirm if that remains true since the biography came out in the 1990s, but I would not be surprised if it is still true. What is confirmed is that even when interest in banned Russian poets surged, she was not among them. In fact, beyond a plaque at her birth house and an instance of a musician putting her poetry to music back in 2002, there doesn't seem to be much about her. Given the current state of Russia today in the 2020s, I would not be surprised if this lack of notice and staying on the fringe remains the case for quite some time. Thank you for listening to Paris Lesbos, a historical podcast of mainly lesbian and bisexual and so forth women, both before and after World War I, but mainly, 1880 to 1945. We welcome any suggestions you leave in comments or emails and whatnot about who we should explore next on this podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and our own website. And remember, your last act may be a most ill-advised love affair, but the poetry will live on.